Welcome to this new how-to. In this how-to we're going to look at the Crossbleed engine start. So the Crossbleed engine start is a special procedure which normally is only used when the APU for some reason fails. So as you can see, engine number 1 is running, but engine number 2 has failed. The reason for this is that the current implementation for the Crossbleed engine start only works when one of the engines is running. The reason for this is that I would say they're not yet finished implementing the full functionality, because normally this procedure would require you to have an air start unit which would help you to start the first engine, and then using the first engine you can start the second engine. This procedure, according to the manual, is only used in very rare occasions, as I mentioned already, right, when the APU is failing. And it should be, I would say, mentioned that it's really important that the Crossbleed engine start should not be performed under the following circumstances in real life. So likely not in the sim, but hey, in the sim we can, I would say, play around a bit, right? During the pushback operations, you should never use it, as well as the situations where the thrust of the engine would endanger life or property, because I would say it has, I would say, it could have an impact on the, I would say, people around the aircraft and also the properties which are, I would say, close by. So keep that in mind. So again, I've already mentioned it. Normally you will start using the air start unit. You will start the first engine and then start the second engine. For this video, since the implementation is not finished yet, we are going to use engine number 1 to start engine number 2. Right, you can see engine number 2 has, I would say, stopped, but engine number 1 is already running. So if you go inside the aircraft, right, we can look at the engine and you can see that engine number 1, right, it's, I would say, working correct. And if we go to the bleed, we can also see that that one is working correct. But you can see that the PSI here for engine number 2 is relatively low, because the engine completely has stopped. So the procedure which is described in the manual of Flybywire mentions specifically that engine number 1 really needs to be running and needs to be in the available mode, which means that you need to keep an eye on the PSI mode, but also keep an eye on the N2 mode, because it should give you the message that the engine is running and everything is happy before you're getting performance action. Else, I would say, both engines will stop and then you're, well, between brackets, you're screwed. So to simulate this procedure, what we need to do is we need to switch off the bleed. And to do that, let me zoom out a bit. We need to go to the top of the aircraft, and here you see a button where you can say, okay, hey, switch off the bleed, or on, right? In this case it's on, or off, sorry, and in this case it's on. So we're switching it off. Then we need to set the Crossbleed, which you can find next to the APU bleed, and we need to switch off engine number 2 bleed. That's to simulate the procedure. So once we've done that, right, we can return to the engine and then have a look at it. Because if we look at this engine part, and especially at the bleed part on the eCam, you will see now that the PSI has started to increase, right? It went really quick. And that's because it's using the PSI from engine number 1 to send it to the to engine number 2. The other observation you can make is that, let's say, the normal green line which you see over here is being different here, right? So we closed off the bleed, which means that the bleed is not, let's say, provided or delivered by this method, but now is being used by using the Crossbleed functionality. Once you've done that, right, once everything is, I would say, in place, then you can see that the line is here and it will be feeding the PSI to engine number 2. Now, if we go to the engine number 2, we can start it, of course, right? So we can go to the button over here, the engine mode selector. We switch it to ignition start mode. And once you've done that, you would see some changes over here normally, right? So keep an eye on the engine. We can go to the engine mode and then over here. And then you likely would see some changes here. But of course, you really need to make sure that you switched on the master mode also. That's what we're going to do here, right? One thing I observed is that initially it will drop down to a lower value. And what they're also specifically mentioning is that you need to keep an eye on the engine 1 PSI. Because if it drops to a too low value, then you're screwed. But also it doesn't start engine number 2. So what you can do is you can keep an eye on this one, right? Because then you can monitor the PSI, or you can go to the engine specific page where you can also monitor the PSI on the bottom. Now, if you want to speed up the process, what they're mentioning is that you should have a look at this one and make sure that the PSI of engine number 2 does not drop below 30%, which is the case. So if this happens, let's say, then that doesn't have enough power to start the engine. So what I did in my case, but hey, that's how I did it, because for me, I would say it didn't work as described in the manual, is I increased the throttle a little bit for engine number 1. And that's also what they're mentioning in the manual. If this value drops to a value which is too low, then it could affect the start process of the other engine. So we're gonna move the throttle a little bit. Not too much, of course. What you then will see is that this PSI will increase, which also will ensure that the PSI of this engine will increase. And if you listen very carefully now, you hear that engine number 2 is starting. So the question, of course, is, okay, hey, why didn't, I would say, engine number 2 started? I do think that the reason behind that is because the PSI is too low. So you need to boost the PSI a bit by throttling engine number 1. But I'm waiting for some official confirmation. So if you are, say, an A320 pilot, or you're, I would say, a really good sim flyer, maybe even better than I, then have a look at this video, and then please describe in the comment box below what you think is the correct process to ensure that the PSI is increasing on engine number 2. So with this, we're ending this video. I hope you liked it. If you liked it, then consider to use the like button. If you got questions or comments, then feel free to post them in the comment box below. And if you want to stay up to date about new videos posting, then make sure that you're subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.